Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever or whenever you are. Welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, your host. I'm here live at webinar headquarters in Middleton, Idaho. Today we will learn from Rhonda Lauritsen on the topic of power of place, using MyHeritage to tell the stories of buildings and places. Sounds really exciting. Today you come to us from these 20 countries. Thanks to all of you for sharing part of your day with us. Be sure to download the syllabus, which is available right now on the webinar's registration page at familytreewebinars.com, or I've put a copy of it at the bottom of your webinar control panel, so that's where you can obtain it as well. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker. Rhonda Lauritsen is a professional biography with multiple published books. She does client work, including building nominations to the National Register of Historic Places and writing client family history stories. She believes that when you tell your story, it changes the ending. This is why her passion is teaching, coaching clients, and presenting at conferences. As an author, she specializes in writing life stories, collecting oral history, and historical storytelling. Before she started this work full-time, she served as a college vice president, and before that was a corporate CEO. So please put together your virtual hands. Let's give Rhonda Lauritsen a nice warm webinar welcome. Rhonda, how are you? And welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm so excited to see where everybody's from.
Well, we've got a real good international audience, and so we're excited to learn from you today. So look for that show screen button, and I'll let you know when it's all good here on my end. Okay, looks good, Rhonda. The time's all yours. Thanks again.
Okay, fantastic. Well, to begin, I want to tell you a little bit about how I fell into this work of telling the stories of places. I didn't start out, I don't have the sort of professional classical training in doing building research, but after the 2008 housing fiasco here in the United States, my husband and I had the chance to pick up this very special house that you see in front of you. It didn't look like this when we bought it. It was in a rundown neighborhood. The house was sagging, needed more than a little love to bring it back to life. But one paintbrush stroke at a time, we brought this wonderful house back to life. And it was really the home of our dreams, just because we both love architecture, we love old houses, we love stories. And so getting to live in this special place, in this historic neighborhood, really deepened my love for architecture. I'd always been taking field guides of historic homes with me on vacation and looking up buildings and learning. And so while living there, did the research on the home, started telling the story of the home and of the neighborhood. And a neighbor was an architect. She was a friend of mine, asked me, she knew that I was doing storytelling for a living at that time. She asked, hey, would you be interested in helping me do the history piece for a National Register nomination? These are what get buildings on the National Register of Historic Places. And these are through the National Park Service here in the United States. And I didn't know any better. I had no idea what I was in for. And I said, sure, sounds like fun. So my journey began then. And these projects have just kept coming to me again and again. And it's one of my very favorite things to do. And I'm excited today specifically to tell you about some of the great MyHeritage resources. And I'm delighted to be invited by them and glad that they are sponsoring this talk. So before we continue, I wanted to tell you also that I have a toolkit. You can either get the QR code, there's a link in the chat, or you can just get this link here. I will give you all the slides as well as some oral history resources and other resources to help you tell the stories of buildings. And I also want to say my experience is I live and work in the United States, so my experience is here. But of course, the MyHeritage resources are from everywhere, and many of these principles will apply everywhere. But I just wanted to shout out, I know many of you are from all over the world, and so welcome, and I'm excited to benchmark what you're doing as well. Something else about place. It's not just the buildings that are beautiful, but there's something about place. Have you ever had the place of an ancestor call you? Have you ever stood on your feet on the ground that your ancestors lived and worked and plowed, been drawn to those places without ever realizing it? I can tell you I've had more experiences with place that have raised the hairs on my arms than with almost any other part of my storytelling. I don't know what it is, but I consistently find myself where my ancestors lived without knowing it. And case in point, when my architect friend asked me to help, I'd never spent any time in this part of the state of Utah. I live in Utah, and never spent any time in this particular community. We had been asked by the state, long story short, they called her for various reasons. They specifically called her. She called me kind of at random. So we drove down to this site where we would be researching. It was a granary, and that's now owned by an arts center. So we pulled up our car, parked, and I noticed this monument. And so I made a beeline to the monument, wanted to see what it said. And I just stopped in my tracks. On that monument were my ancestors' names. I didn't know at the time that this plot of land that we would be researching was part of the old fort, and 3 of my ancestral lines, 3 families from which I'm descended, were part of the original families that founded that fort and that founded the town. I didn't know that until we got there. I mean, I kind of knew we had some ties, but how weird is that, right? Of all the people they could have asked in the state, why me? And I don't know why. It could be coincidence, right? Could also be that the stories want to be told. Maybe I like to think that our ancestors like to be remembered, and that there's a tie to place and to us and them somehow, right? The other freaky thing about this, it doesn't end there. The plot thickens. So my architect friend also turns out had an ancestor from that community, and she told the director of this arts center, hey, my ancestor was CCA Christensen, the famous painter from down there. And the Amy, the other woman on the line, said, oh yeah, we know him. His cabin is on our property. So my 3rd great-grandparents, her 3rd great-grandparents all had the ties to this property. So on the left is the home of my ancestor that was listed on this plaque. So I will continue to tell a few stories as we get into the nitty-gritty of how to do research. But these are some of the projects I've had the joy of working on. Been hired by Salt Lake City to do the research for Pioneer Park. We recently got a whole cemetery district created as a National Historic District. I've done the story of a hotel for local, a bunch of local stories in my own community, of the stockyards for the city. I could just go on, but lots of projects. So I've learned a lot on the job, and I'm just excited to share with you. So now let's talk about process. In every project, I begin with oral history. I want to know, even if the home or the building is much older, I want to talk to anyone who's ever lived or worked there or have ties to it. What do you know? What do the current owners know? What has been passed down in the form of storytelling or rumor, or what do they have in their archives? What do they know? What are the gaps? What are their hunches? Starting with oral history is one of the best places to get the stories. And I'm passionate about voice. Anytime you can get someone's voice to tell a story, there's personality in it, right? The voice is intimate, and it brings someone back, right? Like they're in the room. The way a person tells a story with their accent and their colloquialisms is a precious piece of history that I always want to include in every project. So I begin, whether it's the story of a building or the story of a family, with oral history. And I just included this picture of this beautiful woman, Heidi. She's one of my clients right now. And here she's reading letters from Germany. We're working on her story right now of being a child in Berlin during the war. So I've had a great privilege of sitting with her and many other clients. Rachel Trotter and I, who work together, we've done thousands of oral history interviews, and it's one of the most intimate and poignant experiences you can possibly have. So start by asking people, what are the stories? You may not have thought about asking other genealogists, but if there's someone else who's ever worked on a history, ask them what they know. Because there are many things that are in their minds and that they've picked up, insights that they have that might not be recorded anywhere. So be sure to ask those questions. And again, that's why I wanted to give you that toolkit, because it includes some questions and processes and assistance for doing oral history interviews. The next thing we start with is a title search to find out what the chain of ownership is on who owned the property. Now, this is something here in my community that you have to go to what's called the county recorder's office. And it used to be that you would have to physically pull the old books from the shelves and go from ledger to ledger and track down the chain of ownership that way. Just recently, they've finished being digitized, so you can buy a CD. I think they still physically come on a CD. Maybe it's a flash drive now, but you can buy it digitally. Or you can hire someone to do a title search, the kind of thing that you would do if you were purchasing property, to find out what the chain of ownership was. And I start with that. I learned this the hard way after doing a few of these and realizing, oh, I need to really nail down who owned it, because who owned it is how you get the good stuff, right? That's how you get the stories. Now, of course, I want to know the dates. So a title search can tell you who owned the property, what the transfers in ownership were, when any changes happened. For example, here in the United States, you can often tell if someone took out a loan against the property. You can tell, oh, that loan was taken out at the same time they did a renovation. They took out a loan so that they could add a building or do an addition. So it can give you important clues as to changes that happened on the property as well. The title search won't necessarily tell you who lived in the property, right? Because it might be owned by someone different who lived there. But that's my first starting point. I like to take a list and make sure I've got everybody's names. And then once I've got that nailed down, we can really start getting to the good stuff. One of the next things I love to do is go through city directories on MyHeritage. I was in attendance at Roots Tech a few years ago when MyHeritage made the announcement that they had acquired the United States city directory. And I wanted to stand up in my chair and cheer, because these directories are a treasure trove, because they can tell you not who owned the property, but who lived in it. And so if you have a property that had renters or that had businesses, this can tell you who is occupying the property from year to year. So a city directory is kind of like what used to be the old phone book. Some of us remember phone books, right? Well, city directories go back even farther and tell you who lived at different addresses. Obviously, a census record is where you would want to start as well, but city directories can give you a year-by-year glimpse, and they include lots of colorful details like advertisements and just a lot of interesting things that you can get from city directories. So I especially love to see the ads and other details. So if you go into MyHeritage, you can type in the name of a person who lived at a property. So the house that we lived in is called the Andrew J. Warner House. So I type in his name, Andrew J. Warner, and of course, all variations of that, Andy A.J. Warner, to see what comes up. And here we do have some city directories. We can tell that we have his residence at 726 25th Street. That was our home, that beautiful home I showed you. He was the person who had that home built with his wife. And we can also see that he was a manager. I don't think you can see it on this one, but if you scroll down on the page, there were also records where he was managing a hotel down the street. So all kinds of great records show up for Andrew J. Warner during those times, giving you really great details, especially in the 1890s, when I don't have any journals, I didn't have anything in his own hand. So everything I collected about them and about the early days of the home had to come from records like this. Now, once you've done a search on a property, a city directory search, you can also, I typed in another client's name because I did research on this person, Bert N. Smith, and I zoomed in because you can see here where it says, see who else lived at this address. So you click on that, and I was able to find out, so down here it also shows that his wife lived with him in this early home during the early years of their marriage. And I also learned that during the time when he was serving in World War II. His wife's sister lived there with his wife and other people who lived in that house. And I also got a record when he was living in his mother's house at a different address. So lots of great things that you may not realize through these city directories. And also, would you think that it would have someone's occupation as well? So great clues as to a property and the story behind the property. Another fantastic resource found on MyHeritage are the gazetteers. These are another type of directory, basically kind of like a phone book or a city directory, just I guess another name for it. This is a National Register nomination that I worked on this year for this iconic barn. Let me go back, the Sunnyfield barn in the town of Eden, Utah. And as I was researching on MyHeritage to find the stories of the people, I found this fantastic gazetteer listing. And the reason why this was so useful was that it gave me the name and occupation of all of the people in this very small town in, I believe this was about 1910. I can't remember off the top of my head, but in about 1910, it gave me every person's occupation. And what I was able to tell was that almost everyone in this community at the time was a dairy farmer. You get on this list, dairy, dairy, dairy. Well, that became an important note as we made the case to the National Park Service that this barn was worthy of going on the National Register. Normally, barns are not the type of building that would get put on the National Register. But this one is because it's one of the only ones left, right? It's an iconic building in the town. It's well known, but also because it represents a time and place that really no longer exists. This community is dramatically different today. People are no longer dairy farmers. This is the one piece of that history that remains. And I was able to prove, look, 1910, everyone was a dairy farmer. Today, they're all, wealthy ski people. So gazetteers are another great type of record to look for. Another type of record that you can find are maps. And I'll give you a couple of tips about maps. A student of mine recently shared this fantastic, just practical tip. As you're looking at maps, especially historic maps in a neighborhood that may have changed a lot, make sure as you look at the map, you note those landmarks that don't change, right? If you can pinpoint, oh, that's where the cemetery is, you're likely to find that the cemetery doesn't change. Oftentimes churches and those kinds of things don't change as well. So it can really help orient you as you overlay maps and the different demolitions of whole neighborhoods for gentrification through the years. So there's just a practical tip that I picked up just this last week from a student. Now, fire insurance maps. Here in my community, these are called Sanborn, Sanborn. Sanborn was the company, the fire insurance company, and they made these whole maps of communities. So in your town or country, they may be a totally different company, but see if these exist, because they show this fantastic detail of what existed on the property. And Sanborn would do new maps every few years because they needed to know what they had to insure. And so here, this was for that granary that I was telling you about, the first project I worked on. We were able to go to the Sanborn fire insurance maps, zoom in and see these abbreviations here. Sorry, every time I move my mouse, I try to zoom in and then I promise I'll stop touching my mouse. Okay, so you zoom in here and see on the left this blue box that says WHO. That stands for warehouse. So that was the granary. Below it was the tithing office. There was another granary next door. You see that there was a hay storage behind, the general store next door. And then you zoom out and you can see the entire block and what was surrounding it. So oftentimes when you look from year to year, you can see when outbuildings appear, when they're destroyed, and just other interesting details about the property itself. In your community, you might be lucky enough to find some of these bird's eye maps. These are drawn in the United States anyway, and they are amazing. Some of these are available through MyHeritage's partner. I forget off the top of my head what the name of the partner is, but anyway, you can see many of these there. Or you can go to the United States Library of Congress. In your country, obviously, they would be located somewhere else. But you see what the whole community looked like drawn. But what's cool is you can download a TIFF of these, so a very high resolution version. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when you zoom in really fine. This is for research that we did in Salt Lake City for Pioneer Park. This was the original place where the Mormon pioneers first encamped when they entered the Salt Lake Valley. Anyway, that's backstory. But the point is we were doing the history of this property through time. And I was able to pull these different bird's eye maps that were done by different people over several time periods. They're about 10 years apart. And you can see these drawings. And on the drawings, they even show what the trees look like. So in one drawing here on the left, I can see that there are tree plantings. I can't tell exactly what kind of trees they are. But on the one in the middle, those are Lombardy poplars. So we know that at one point there were Lombardy poplars along the east side. You can see that there are some buildings. You can see where the trains come in. You can see how the plantings and the buildings changed over time. So I never would have realized that you could get that level of detail from a bird's eye map. Now, newspapers, I'm sure you already know, the newspaper articles are where we have the good stuff, right? Especially in the United States in the turn of the century time, the gossip columns and that tell about people's comings and goings. This gives you the colorful stuff about the residents. And that's why you want to start with the names of the people who lived there, because then you can go in and do a newspaper search to find out when they show up in history. So this was some of these newspaper articles on the left are related to a cemetery. This was the cemetery that we got the whole district put on the National Register. But we learned that some of the famous people that were buried there included Belle London. That was her sort of pseudonym. She was the most notorious prostitute in all of Utah, and she ran these houses of ill repute. She also happened to be a fabulous businesswoman of her day and has some of the most colorful stories of the Wild West here in Utah around her. And so we got all these fantastic newspaper articles once we know the people's names. So yeah, definitely get in and enjoy all of the newspaper articles and stories that will come to light. You might find other amazing details by zooming in. So on another project that I worked on, this was the Kirk Hotel in a town called Tooele, Utah. We were getting this building on the National Register as well. And we were really racking our brains because the building itself was not that remarkable, even though it was kind of the only hotel in town. And we were trying to figure out our angle to make sure that it was worthy of being on the National Register. But I couldn't find a lot about it until I happened upon this great article that talked about the year that the building was being built. And I read the article and I was like, okay, that's nice. But then I zoomed in on this picture. I was like, wait, what is that in the corner? I zoomed in, and there in the corner, we see something that says Ashton and Evans Architects. That little teeny note was our ticket to the National Register nomination, because it turned out that Ashton and Evans were some of the most prominent architects of the day. They built some of the famous buildings here in Utah, including the old Saltaire Resort that was like the Coney Island of the West, and other buildings that were all over the National Register in Utah. And because they were famous architects, it was a natural tie-in, and it kind of made a slam dunk. So what's my point of all this? My point is, number one, newspaper articles are the best. And number two, you just never know when the tiniest of details will become really important. So I'll talk in a minute about my process for capturing the details, because I always keep a running narrative of what I'm learning, because something that doesn't strike me as especially important early on will just kind of stick with me. And later I will go, oh, that that is a clue to a bigger story. And I'll tug on a thread, and you just never know. And sometimes those threads will lead you to someplace really important. So pay attention to the tiniest of details as you're a detective in your work. Again, I talked about the photos and the stories. Here we have on the left, this was the famous Belle London, whose birth name, her given name, was actually Dora Topham, and her husband on the right, the dapper Thomas Topham, who was kind of her bodyguard too. Was he really a husband, or was he a bruiser and bodyguard? I don't know. But here we have their headstone in the cemetery. And what's interesting about the headstone, a few things. And by the way, I'm just pointing out also that some of the things are records that you can find through newspaper articles and other records, like these amazing pictures of them, or this drawing. This was from a newspaper article about Thomas Topham. And some things you can only see by going there, right? By setting foot on the land. And here we see the physical headstone, one of the most prominent grave markers in all of the cemetery, Topham. And we have Mr. Thomas Topham's grave on the right, and on the left, hers doesn't exist. It was waiting for her, but she got ran out of town. She ended up having to go to San Francisco and leave town. She kind of got fed up with politics and other things here. And so she didn't die in this community where she anticipated being buried. And then when you walk around to the other side of the headstone, you see something else that's important. There are other people buried on this site too. Babies that didn't belong to her. Some of the babies that were born to the girls that worked for her. Dora Topham, or Belle London, was known for actually taking pretty good care of the girls that worked as prostitutes for her. And she told people, don't go into this line of work. You don't want to do this. But if people ended up in that line of work, she did her best to take care of them, even to the point of burying some of the babies that were maybe stillborn or had other issues, buried them in her own plot of land. So other things, though, not everything is digitized. Someday, maybe every last thing will be digitized, right? And every year you want to check back on MyHeritage to see what's been added, because people are uploading things from their shoeboxes and collections are coming online every day. Today, however, in my community, there's still far too many newspaper articles that are not digitized. MyHeritage, see if you can acquire these. It would be amazing. But what you have to do today is go up physically to the university's special collections, where the newspaper articles are still in folders like this. There's a whole, I think, like 40-year period where the only way you can get them is physically going up there. And there was a woman who worked for the newspaper who clipped articles every single day and carefully and lovingly pasted them into these folders by topic. So you go up there and you find a treasure trove sometimes. So while this is about MyHeritage today, I just wanted to point out that anytime you can go on site and do research, things may emerge that are not yet digitized. And if you can do your part to digitize things and then upload them to MyHeritage, you can be part of the solution as well. So as I mentioned, special collections for museums, local libraries, societies, and universities may have clues to the past that don't exist yet in an online form. When you go, be sure to bring a method to digitize. If you're in a special collections library, you probably won't be allowed to take the records out. So I always bring a light box with me, and I spend an entire day. I usually try to bring an assistant, might be a friend I've roped into it, my daughter, just somebody to physically help me click the button and go click, 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 and digitize as fast as I humanly can in a day while I'm there, so that I can bring it all back and sort through it later. When I'm on site, I don't take the time to sort through and make decisions and read about what's important and what's not. I just try to get it all, and then I sort through it at home, because time on site is precious. While you're there, be sure to ask an archivist. The humans, as I mentioned, are the keepers of the stories, and they may know things. I once read an article, I wish I remembered the source, but they referred to these archivists in collections as like the shaman of the research. They know stuff. that nobody else knows. And if you ask them, tell them what you're working on, ask them for help, they may be able to point you in the right direction. They may be able to tell you who in the community has collections, who knows what other names to look under, what books to pull. They're just amazing sources of research. So be sure to ask them. And I have this picture on the left as a case in point. I mentioned the uncanny things that happen in these stories. Well, I'm going to tell you another story. I was working on the story of what's called the Ogden Union Stockyards. This is where people bought and sold livestock in my community. Let me get a drink here. I've got a little frog in my throat. So I was working on this project, and I went up to the university and I asked the archivist, and she said, "Oh, do I have something for you? These just came in." And she handed me a box of photographs that were taken by a woman who never married and had no heirs. And this box of photographs that I wouldn't learn how she came to possess them until a year later, when I wanted to know who the woman was behind these photographs and how did this collection come to be. I tracked down the estate and learned that they had been behind like a false wall in a fireplace. Clue. The good stuff in old houses is always behind the false walls because they get walled over, and it's like a time capsule, things that never change. I found some of the most incredible things behind old walls. Well, this box of photographs was there, and it contained pictures that she had taken with her little camera through the years that were mundane, little snapshots of where she lived and worked. And she happened to work in the stockyards and took these incredible pictures because they were mundane. They weren't the big, these are the building on a fancy day, on a celebration day. No, these were the little things that no one else ever thought was interesting enough to take pictures of, but she did. And these pictures came to the university the very week that I was working on this project. If I'd been a week earlier, I would have missed them. So I don't know it's just freaky. And it happens to me again and again. So I get really excited about it because it feels like there's something more at work. I don't know. Maybe you think I'm crazy, but it keeps happening. So I'm just rolling with it. Okay, we have time for one more story. All right, I'm going to tell you one more short story about another uncanny coincidence. So on this story of you remember the property where I showed up and my ancestor's name was on that monument? Well, I showed you that picture of my ancestor's home down here on the left. And I went to do a day of physical research at the Church History Library here in Salt Lake City. And while I was scrolling through microfilm, things that are not yet digitized, can't wait till they're all digitized. And when I was scrolling through microfilm, I happened upon a drawing of my own ancestor's home. So I was just researching the town, right? Researching this other building, but there was my ancestor's home in another part of the town. And I was so excited to see this architectural drawing. And while I had this picture in front of me of my ancestor's home, the guy next to me is also doing research, and he's just sort of being friendly. He says, "Hey, what are you working on?" And I said, "Oh, I'm researching the Ephraim Relief Society granary." And he laughs out loud. He said, "Oh yeah, I know it. I'm researching CCA Christensen right now." CCA Christensen? That's my architect friend's third great grandfather, the one whose cabin was on the property. So I'm there at the Church History Library and he's here at the Church History Library, and we're both sitting side by side researching our contemporaries. It was the weirdest, freakiest thing, and I just had to laugh. Well, I don't know. What do I even say, right? Other than thank you, research gods, for just smiling on me. That is how I take it, as like a little nod that I'm on the right track. Okay, a couple more notes. In your community, I highly recommend joining the social media groups or any discussion forums that relate to your community, and issue a call for history. So for example, we have a lot of Facebook groups here in my community for history. And so if you join those Facebook groups, you can say, hey, I'm working on doing the research for the Kirk Hotel. Does anybody have anything? Do you have any photos? Do you have any stories? And it's amazing what will come out of the woodwork when you post a call for history in these groups where other people have a similar interest. So make sure you make your interest known, because people have stuff. They have stuff that hasn't yet gone into the record keeping yet. Also remember, so once you've done your own primary research, a next step, so you've done your primary research, a title search, oral history, you've done searching for primary articles like newspapers and found stories. Next, you want to do some secondary research. Go find books about your community to paint an idea of the historic context. And I once heard a historian tell me, it's a good idea to do your primary research first. And she actually read a project that I was working on and said, your primary research is fantastic. You've found stuff that no one else has found. You've got great sources, but I recommend that you beef up your secondary research to show that you've digested the work of others, that you are including the context of the day, that you understand the broader story of what was happening in the community. And she said it will be helpful because you've done your primary research first, so you know if there are factual errors in other people's work, you can sort of be on guard for that. Otherwise, if you go to their work first, you might actually continue to make the same mistakes that they've made. So your work might add something that theirs hasn't. You might be able to correct any errors. And again, just to get the idea of the context, the history of the time and place. So to do that, you may find digital books on MyHeritage, on other online sources, Google Docs, not Google Docs, but like Google Books. And for me, physically, it also often requires going to the library and pulling the books of my community. And if you're not in that community, it can be harder because sometimes those books, they're out of print. They're only existing on the shelves of a library. So someday we may be able to get it from our computers, and it's getting better all the time. So now let's talk about the writing process. We talked about research, but how to organize your research. I mean, I could teach a whole day on sort of organizing and how to tag things and et cetera. But from a high level perspective, there are a couple of key documents that I keep while I'm working. And one is what I just call a master history document. And I use Word, although you can use Google Docs or whatever, but I just plunk everything into this master document. I organize it by section. I use the Microsoft Word function to create an automatic index. So I'll use like the headers and subheaders, and that way it will create an automatic table of contents for me that's hyperlinked. If you don't know how to do that, find a tutorial on it. It will be an absolute savior for you in your work. So there's just a tip. Learn how to use the table of contents feature. I wish I had done this years ago. Just a pro tip for you. So again, in this master history document, I tend to put kind of everything. I keep a running narrative of my thoughts, of excerpts from articles, excerpts from people's stories. I might plunk pictures in there. It's kind of messy, but it's just a catch-all for while I'm doing research, because I don't want to have to go back and find things later. Be sure to put in your citations as you go so that you don't have to go back, and don't be lazy. Do your citations as you go so that you can find things later. It's a really big fat hassle to do citations at the end. So yeah, that all just goes into a big master history document. Meanwhile, I have another document in front of me all the time, and that is my timeline. I keep my timelines really simple while I'm working. Later, I might use the timeline features like on MyHeritage to find out what's happening in the world. So there's some fun tools that you can use to bring a timeline to life. But while I'm working, I just keep a straight up, super easy, uncomplicated Excel spreadsheet. You could put it in a Google Doc. You could also put it like in a Word file. I like a spreadsheet because it expands. It's easy to add and remove like lines and columns. You can make it go as many columns to the right as you want. I've seen some great examples from my students where they will organize it not linearly, where each line is a new date, but they'll actually put the dates on the top. Anyway, there are other ways you can organize it, but I did want to show you a screenshot of the way that I do my timelines. And the reason why to keep it simple is because you want to have no friction, right? Just have a place to put every time you see a date, put it in the timeline. If you found an article, put it in the timeline. If you found a date that, like on the title search, states the property was bought, sold, renovations made, anytime anything is mentioned in a newspaper article, just stick it in your timeline so that you can refer back. This will become something that you will use as a working document throughout. So here on the left, I just put a quick column for the date. In the middle, I put a description of activity. If I am if I'm pulling excerpts from a newspaper article, I might just plunk the entire excerpt from a short article right in this middle description of activity so that I don't have to physically pull up the image later. And then on the right, I will put like the source. So I have a kind of a complicated naming structure, which is probably beyond the scope of this class, but I put what the file name is for the file in my folder structure so that I know where to find it and what the name of it is in my naming convention. So you have your master running document, you will keep a timeline, and then another document that I always keep is a list of master transcripts. So if I'm doing a lot of oral history, I will plunk all of the transcripts from the oral history into a massive document as well. So those are my three main working documents. And then when I start writing, I will create a brand new clean document and write it from scratch. So as I get into the writing process, I love storyboarding. I think of everything as a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. This is my own storyboard template, which I've included in the toolkit that you can get. It's a sticky note template, so you can print it out and you can basically map out the major emotional beats of your story using sticky notes. And I love sticky notes because they are iterative, right? There's nothing of perfection in a sticky note. There's nothing about getting it perfect. I'm just scratching and throwing them away and scratching and throwing them away. It's a mental process of creativity as I'm thinking about what does the story mean, right? So you've got the facts. Now you're digging into the so what, right? What does the story mean to me? What is it that's interesting? What is it that taught me? What did I learn from the people who lived there? What are the messages in the walls themselves? What is it that I want to say, right? So you know the facts, but what is it that's so interesting about this story that you're going to spend all this time telling it? There's something there. That something is your theme. You now, as the writer, you get to say something about it. You get to be the commentator and leave your own take on it, your own words, your own contribution to the history in your voice. And that's a big responsibility, I know, but it's also a privilege and a joy. So I'm looking for, in a story arc, I'm looking for triumph. I'm looking for lessons learned. I'm looking for hard times when the people that lived there or that owned the building really had to dig deep. Maybe a time when the building almost didn't make it. That the granary that I mentioned, this beautiful stone granary built by women, owned by women, built for charity. It almost didn't survive the wrecking ball. The town looked at it as an eyesore, and if they'd had the money to demolish it, they would have. But a few brave people in town, literally, this is not hyperbole, they literally stood in front of bulldozers one day and said, "You will not tear down our history." And it bought them enough time to buy the property and save it from demolition. So that was the darkest hour of that story. And so you're looking for a dark night of the soul moment followed by redemption. So these are some of the high points in a storyboard that I'm looking for. And storyboarding and storytelling is sort of, again, out of the scope of this class about MyHeritage, but I did want to sort of pique your interest because you want to tell a story that's compelling and interesting to read, even if it is history. You get to be the narrator. So a few tips for writing. Remember your audience and your purpose, right? A formal project like a National Register nomination won't be written with a lot of commentary and my own opinion, and a lot of the juicy details won't make it in that document. So oftentimes I like to do some other storytelling for the community where I bring it to life with a little more color. And so I might do a video, or I might post a story in a social media group, or of course, post a story in MyHeritage about it. One of the best tips I ever learned for writing a narrative like this came from a professional historian, Jenny Lund, and she'd read one of my drafts, and she said it was good, she was very encouraging, but she noted that I'd included too many sort of long excerpts. And I'm just telling you right now, long excerpts are boring, right? We don't want to read big, long articles of newspapers, big, long clips from people's journals. You want to really trim that down. And she told me, she said, I challenge you to sit down. You've done all your research. I know you know this story. Sit down and write the first draft from memory. Don't consult your sources. Just let her rip. I don't think she used the word let her rip, but those are my words. Write it from the heart, from your memory, because what you do, it's incredibly freeing. You'll be amazed if you set a timer and just make yourself write, turn off all distractions, just get it out there. You'll be amazed what comes forward and how you're not bogged down by having to look up every detail and wonder, should I include that or not? Looking everything up. You'll never finish if you bog yourself down like that. But if you just let it flow, you'll be surprised that it does flow and that somehow the important pieces, they come out. You know it. So let it come out and let it go onto paper in a way that you allow inspiration to come from you and through you. So keep the quotes short. She encouraged me, if I'm going to quote from anything, don't do any more than about a sentence. You can always go back and look up those details later, but in that process, just keep your pen moving, keep your fingers working on the keyboard. Then look, one of the common questions that gets asked of students in my classes, they always ask, and I'm always asking myself, how much detail should I include? Like, how much is enough? How much is too much? How much historic context to include? And it's a tough judgment call. I mean, you're looking to strike the right balance, right? So I'm always looking for what I call the well-chosen detail. Look for one detail that sort of stands in for all the others. One thing that's a symbol. In this granary, the idea of wheat became the symbol for all that the women did there, for their faith, for planting a seed that grew, for harvesting the land when the men were all gone. There was so much in the symbolism of wheat. And it turned out I found the story of a woman who planted her fields while her husband was away, and the men had planted theirs a little deeper, and she planted hers a little deeper and a little later than theirs. And what happened was theirs came up, and the crickets came and decimated everyone's field. The Mormon crickets came and ate every living blade of grass, every stalk of wheat. There's nothing left. All of their seed grain gone. Except hers, planted a little later and a little deeper, came up a couple of weeks later after the hordes of crickets were gone. Her grain made it. Her grain fed the whole community that year. She ended up saving a vial of that wheat, and she was buried with it. That was a symbol of her faith, of her resilience. And it was a symbol of this building. She was one of the caretakers of this building. So I know I'm getting a little bit in the weeds, but the point is, that wheat, that vial of wheat. I originally found that story and thought it was interesting, but didn't realize just how important it would be in the storytelling until I went, oh, that's the hook. That's the heart of this story. And I built the storytelling around that. In the video, not obviously in the National Register nomination. I kept it much more to the facts in the National Register nomination. So again, two different purposes, right? One was for the community. One was for the arts center to really tell the story of the people. The other one was a story of the building, just the facts. So again, answer, so what? What does it mean to you? One of the best techniques in writing a historical narrative is when I realize that I get to be the narrator. And in many stories, the narrator is a character, right? So if you're writing the story, maybe it's a story of an ancestral home, you as a descendant get to be a character. You can tell the story from your perspective. You can tell how your experience with the home, why you're telling the story of the home, what you learned along the way, and what it means to you. And in that way, you can add in some context. You can add in some appropriate perhapsing, right? You can say, I wonder how she must have felt. You can say things like, maybe, perhaps, she must have. So you can do a little bit of speculation when you're the narrator, because then the reader understands that it's you speculating and not a fact that you found in your research. So that can be really helpful, and I want to empower you to use your own voice in this process. And then remember, there is no good writing, only rewriting, right? So write a terrible first draft. We like to think of that as a steaming pile of garbage, right? Just get it down and it will get a little better the next time and a little better the next time. So now let's talk about the editing process. Write your first draft. I'm going to give you a quote that I've been living by recently because I've been in the middle of a first draft. And the author, Stephen Pressfield, who wrote the wonderful book, The War of Art, he says, write that first draft like the devil himself is poking you in the butt with his pitchfork, because believe me, he is. I love that. The devil himself. So get it down. Then I like to storyboard it, looking for the emotional beats, the theme, the overall story arc. Then I do a self-edit. Then I get some feedback, right? I gave it to a professional historian and she told me how to make it better. And she taught me a few things that helped my writing that I'm even telling you today. Then you'll self-edit it again and probably again and probably again. Then people always ask, when do you call it good? When do you call it good enough? It's such a hard question, right? Those of us who have any perfectionist tendencies, we might work on something forever. And I love a quote from Rick Rubin's wonderful book, the recent book, The Creative Act. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, don't write on a deadline or don't create on a deadline. You want to give yourself the time it takes to do it well. And then he added, but you might finish on a deadline. So if you can give yourself a deadline to finish, maybe it's an event or something like that, get it done. But when do you call it good enough? For me, it's when I look at a work and I say, this is the best I can do now, given my current skill level and given the amount of time that I can reasonably spend on this project. Why? Because I have other projects that are waiting for my attention, other ancestors whose stories want to be told, other buildings that are waiting. If I never finish this one, I can't get on to the next one. So I have a duty to finish it, call it good enough, and move on to the next ones. And I encourage you to let go of some of your perfectionism and get that work out there in the world so that others can enjoy your work and you don't leave it unfinished with the precious time you have. Don't leave your stories still inside you. Don't let them die with you, right? So then you do a copy edit. Once you've called it good enough, you look for any typos and that kind of thing. Then you lay it out. You do another edit after the layout. Oh, I skipped a step. I'm talking fast and I skipped one in here. So important. Do a read aloud. I do a read aloud with every client project I do. We sit down together. We read their story. If it's an entire book, we'll spend a couple of days together reading it. And it's one of the most poignant experiences when you're with a client or with someone and you read their own life to them. I can't explain what a profound privilege it is to connect with someone on that level, to cry with them as you relive the hard parts and laugh in the funny parts and memorialize their life well lived in a story that will live on past them. It's incredible work and it's a privilege. So it's profound, but also it's very practical. When you read it aloud, you'll notice what's wrong with it. You will notice, oh, this section drags. I've used this word 10 times. This is awkward. I need to fix it. This one sounds pretentious and overblown. I need to simplify it. Even when I'm working on a project where I don't have a client, on this National Register nomination project, I had Jenny Lund, the historian, read it. And then after I thought it was done, I sat down outside. It was a beautiful sunny day. I turned on my recorder to have the discipline to read it through from start to finish. So my goal was, I'm going to hit send on this project today. I'm going to send it out and I'm going to be done. But first, I'm going to sit down and read it aloud and make sure it's good. So I sat down, read it aloud, and I went, dang it. I still have work to do. It dragged in a few places. It was my work, and I was bored. And I only noticed it after I made myself read it aloud. So I went back to the drawing board and did one more round of edits before I hit send. And then it was ready to call it good. So this editing process is kind of doing your due diligence, right? Once you've done your best, finish it up and move on. Then, of course, share your work with others so that they can see the history that you've done. Attach the stories and the documents to the people in your tree so that others may find them quickly and easily. Upload the oral history, upload the records and the photos. And with that, this concludes my presentation. Well, two things, not quite done. Don't leave yet. The first thing is to remind you, especially if you joined late, that you can get my toolkit here where you can grab my slides, my oral history toolkit, a storyboard, and other resources, because I hope you will have the same joy for writing the stories of buildings and places in your projects that I've had. It's a privilege, it's a responsibility, and I just bless you in your work, and I want to help you to do it as well as you possibly can so that you're proud of it. So grab that toolkit to help you. And now I want to share the finished product of one of my projects, which was the story of the home that we lived in. I want to share a little video and a little preface about this video. It's simple. I used the simplest of tools. I use Animoto to make this slideshow video using photos. I narrated it in my own voice. It was one of the earliest videos I ever made. So I'm not showing you this because I'm saying it's like that amazing and wonderful. I'm just showing you that it's not as hard as you might think to make a video. And to share a short video like this is one of the best ways to engage people in your family because it brings it to life in a way that's easy to digest. So with that, I'm going to turn the time back to Jeff, and he is going to play the video.
We're still pinching ourselves that we get to live and work in this old house. There's just a feeling inside. Every home has a story, and this is one of ups and downs and ultimately of why beauty is worth saving. If you can believe it, this was taken on glass slides, so this is what the house looked like in 1890. What were the Warners like? They were prominent and beloved. He was a territorial legislator and city councilman. For his day job, he would have walked down the street to the Reed Hotel. They were friends with the Reeds. It's fun to read the old society pages that tell of their outings and elegant parties. Mr. Warner had consumption, which may be why they moved to the coast. He died there, and they never had any children. We don't know a lot about the house in the coming years, but this great picture shows the trolley tracks on 25th Street. During the Depression, it was owned by Keith and Ruth Walquist, and other family members moved in, too. Yes, this is where the junior high got its name. That little blonde girl sitting on Grandma's lap, she came to see us as an elderly woman, and she shared her memories. Later, Nephi James Brown wrote about living here in his journal. During the post-war years, the wealth in Ogden moved east, and the mansions were chopped up into apartments. Those were dreary years of neglect.
Although we have been told there were some great college parties here during the 70s.
And then, under all those layers of white paint, somebody saw more. Ronald D. Hales, an architect, bought the home for his office. He drew up his vision for what the house should be again. Under the house were original spindles to serve as patterns. Hales and his sons made new pieces on a lathe in the basement. They worked together as a family. If not for their loving restoration, this home may have been lost forever. Fast forward 30 years, and the home was sagging again, but we fell in love just like Hales did.
A labor of love, though. It needed new roof, new HVAC, and that was just the big stuff. Dry rot was a huge problem. So the next summer was full-time renovation. We had to replace so much of the woodwork again.
And it took 5 months to paint the outside. The height and pitch on the home, terrifying. This home has stolen our hearts. There's something about living in a home that you know will be here much longer than you will be. On the National Historic Register, this is now the studio of evalog.life. Tell your story.
All right. Well, and I have to say, we don't live in that home anymore. We sold it after we had a child, and she was old enough to want to get out and spread her wings more than she could do in the inner city. So we live out in the country now. So anyway, that was my presentation. I would love to field any questions that may have come up.
Well, before the questions, I wish you could see all the comments that are coming in right here about this today. I like Rebecca. She says, "What a great love story of a home." Great way to describe that, Rebecca. Thank you. Jane, thanks you for the inspiration here today. We've got fantastic and interesting, educational, amazing, and so on. So thank you. It's been nice to have you. This is my first time with you, Rhonda, and the enthusiasm that you're sharing is infectious here. And a couple of times, like right now, you might be able to see the goosebumps here on my arms. It was really enjoyable. Well, for all of you who are hoping to catch the replay of this, or you might want to share this with family, friends, people that you associate with. I'll have the replay of this online within about an hour after we conclude here today, so you can go back, pause, take some additional notes, but it'll be right here on the website I've got showing here at the bottom of the screen. And Rhonda, we've got some good questions that have come in, so we'll get to those here in just a minute after door prizes. Our next webinar on MyHeritage is happening this Friday as part of our 3rd annual Webtember Online Genealogy Conference. Just an hour or so ago, I saw the announcement that MyHeritage has now released the 1931 Canada Census. So just in time for our webinar on the topic of this Friday. And Mike Mansfield's always a fantastic speaker, so we look forward to seeing you all this Friday. Time for door prize. The first one here will be a 1-year MyHeritage Complete Plan. It comes with all of those goodies that you see there on the screen. And I will now go and find who our winner is. And just watch for an email from me if your name happens to be Linda Hines. So congratulations to you, Linda. Hope that's fun to hear your name on the air. Let's next go to a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And our winner for this, we have Margaret Milne. Ooh. I misspelled your name. Just a second here. Okay, Margaret. Okay, Margaret, congrats to you. Got a DNA test kit on its way. And now let's go to some questions, Rhonda. Let's see. So this was very interesting to a lot of people. The light box that you bring into an archive for digitizing. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is a light box and why you might need it?
Yes. So the one that I've loved through the years is the Shotbox, SHOTBOX. I think I heard a rumor that they may not be making them anymore. I have to say it's been one of the workhorses of my toolkit. They're not very expensive. If you can still get one, get one. Like, and they don't pay me. I've never made anything. I just really like the product. It's portable. And what a light box is it's, theirs is portable, and they originally made it for family historians. And you put your phone on the top, or your camera, and you put the items beneath, so you can take pictures of articles, books, artifacts, heirlooms, etc. And the great thing about digitizing is because it's using your camera, you just go click, 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 click. It's just super fast and easy. I think there are some, I have scanners. There are other now optical scanners. I know VividPix has a partnership to do an optical scanning station. I'm really interested to see if that might take over the sort of new technology. So that's what I use. But it's great if you can use your phone and just digitize quickly, because when you're in that environment, speed is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. And it's great to have it like stabilized. Your phone's sitting there. You don't have enough hands to hold your phone and do all that stuff. So it's nice to have a sort of setup. They're probably, that's probably enough about that.
So a light box.
Yes, a light box.
Google that,
and like I said, the one that I call it's a shot box.
Okay, thanks so much. Jane is wondering about her 1950s home, and if she writes up the story about her home, where should she share it? She says, are there places that might want my story about my little home?
Oh, that's such a great question. First, of course, put it in MyHeritage. Put the story there, attach it to any people who lived in the home, because forevermore, once it's there, people can find those stories when they're doing research. So that's the first place I would put it. Next, I would share it with family, any descendants. If you have a family reunion, bring that as a story to tell in a family reunion. In my family, we have a social media site, a group where we post stories, and I like to show like little bits of history on an ongoing basis. I don't overwhelm anybody with big giant books. I've done a few of those, but mostly I like to give them little morsels that they can enjoy and share with, especially young people. The shorter, the better. But also consider your community. If there is a social media group or any other forums in your community, make sure they get it. In my community, not only do we have social media forums, but there's the Heritage Foundation. So the Weber Heritage Foundation, they always want the story of any home in the community. They post on their social media the stories of buildings all the time. Anytime I feed them something, they share it with everybody. Your town newsletters, the genealogical societies, those places are hungry for great content to share. So I think there may be more people than you realize would be interested in a community's architecture.
Yeah, thank you. Very well said. Tambra is wondering about, what do you think about the use of AI to perhaps get an initial draft? Is that an area you've begun to explore at all yet?
Yes. So first of all, I'm not an expert yet. I'm just dabbling. My perspective is that the thing with the strength of AI is in the first draft, right? If you are a person, if you're not a natural writer, that first draft is the blank page is terrifying. So if you can have AI give you a first, we're talking about writing our own first crummy draft. Let AI do that project for you, right? Then, because you've done your research, you're smart enough to know where the problems are, right? You'll be able to say, oh, it got that wrong and it got that wrong. And then add your own voice, right? Add your own color, add what it means to you. That's something AI will never be able to do. They'll never be able to write those things that bring goosebumps, the uncanny moments, the things that speak to you. Be sure that you include your heart in the story. And I think that's the perfect partnership between machines and humans.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you so much. And then Jane is wondering about Animoto. So you mentioned that the video at the end was created with that. What is Animoto?
So first of all, there are a lot of video creation tools. And again, I don't have any dog in the fight. That's a terrible word. That's like a, that's not a humane society sort of word, but you know what I mean? I don't have, I don't have any reason to tell you one or the other than that Animoto, Animoto, is one of the companies that's been at Roots Tech for many years. I met them there. Brief story about how I met them. I ran into a colleague one year and said, "Hey, what's the coolest thing you've learned at Roots Tech?" And he said, Animoto. And it was early in my own journey, and it's a tool for making videos, for making slideshow videos easy. You just drag and drop your photos into it. You can use their templates. You can narrate the slides in your own voice. You can move the cards around. It just makes it easy to make it pretty, right? It's like using the scrapbook tools that are out there. So I'm not a video is so hard. The learning curve is so steep. And again, there are a ton of different tools out there, and there are strengths and weaknesses of many, but just use the easy tools, right? You can have the learning curve of like Adobe Premiere, but I don't know who has time for that. So that's why I use Animoto. Easy.
Yeah, each of my children, they know Animoto very well, as many, well, at least their schools have required them to use Animoto, and they have like an educational license for the school. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot of really neat videos using it.
And they do have a free account. You can get a free account, dabble with it. I teach a whole day class on it where we work through it like together as well. But yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you. We've gone through all of the questions that have come in. Right when we conclude here, I'll be showing a quick 2-minute video, which I created with something other than Animoto. But I'll show this for those of you who are wondering what a webinar membership means. And so stick around if you haven't seen that yet. Rhonda, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, just thank you again for MyHeritage inviting me and sponsoring this, making it all possible. And thanks for all of you being here. I just think it's the most incredible thing that you are all over the world, and I'm sitting here in my little town. I know it's not new news, like it's been going on for a while, but it never ceases to be a marvel to me. So thank you all for spending part of your day with me.
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda. You're welcome here anytime, as are the rest of you. Sure appreciate you being here. And remember, life is short. Do genealogy first. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Rhonda.